My cousin Tristan, the family's golden child, humiliated me at Thanksgiving for my startup, claiming my $25 million valuation wasn't real money. When my own mother told me I was never supposed to outshine him, I knew I was done. So I pulled out my phone and prepared to show them exactly what real money could do. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. For 29 years, I have been the family ghost. A polite, translucent shadow expected to nod, smile, and take up as little space as possible. My entire existence was a supporting role in the Tristan show. This Thanksgiving was no different. I sat at the oversized, polished mahogany table in my Uncle Robert's dining room, nursing a lukewarm cup of tea. The heavy scent of turkey and my grandmother's overly sweet yams hung in the air, a familiar combination that always managed to smell like obligation. Beside me, my mother, Sharon, was already in her classic appeasement mode. Her shoulders were hiked up, her smile just a little too bright as she laughed at one of Robert's booming, self-congratulatory stories about the stock market. She was Robert's younger sister, and she had spent her entire life living in his financial and emotional shadow. By extension, she expected the same from me. Across the table, the star of the show held court, my cousin Tristan. At 31, Tristan was the walking, talking embodiment of unearned confidence. Dressed in a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my first car, he was explaining to our assembled relatives why his golf game was a critical networking tool. He was a senior partner at his father's firm, Stonegate Financial. Everyone in the family repeated this title with a kind of reverence. We all knew, but never said, that his primary responsibilities were golf, long lunches, and cashing the checks his father signed. He had always been the golden child. While I was taking buses to the State University for my computer science degree, a practical, quiet choice, as my mother called it, Tristan was being handed the keys to a new BMW for his 21st birthday. While I was bootstrapping my first company with ramen noodles and sleepless nights, Robert was paying the down payment on Tristan's downtown condo. I was the ghost, he was the sun. The family orbited him, and I was just a speck of dust caught in the light. My cousin Lauren, a journalist with a sharp wit and a genuine curiosity that the rest of the family lacked, turned to me. She was Robert and my mother's cousin, but she'd always operated outside the toxic family hierarchy. "Ava, I read that piece on you in Tech Forward," she said, her voice clear and carrying easily across the table. "A $25 million valuation for your new round? That is absolutely incredible. Congratulations." The conversation screeched to a halt. Every fork stopped midway to a mouth. I saw my mother's smile freeze, her eyes darting nervously to her brother. Robert's face, already ruddy from 2 glasses of wine, darkened. Tristan, who had been mid-gesticulation, slowly lowered his hand. He let out a short, barking laugh. It was a sound I'd heard my whole life. The sound he made right before he needed to cut someone else down to feel tall. "$25 million?" he scoffed, swirling his wine. "Oh, that's cute. You know, that's not real money, Ava. It's just paper. It's imaginary numbers on a spreadsheet until you actually sell, if you can even find a buyer. It's not like profit." He said profit as if he just invented the concept, as if the trust fund he lived on wasn't just inherited wealth. A wave of heat washed over me. It wasn't just embarrassment. It was a cold, familiar rage that I had learned to swallow for decades. I kept my face perfectly neutral, a skill honed by a lifetime of these exact moments. "It's a Series A valuation, Tristan," I said evenly. "It's based on our proprietary analytics platform and our enterprise contract growth. It's very real." "Oh, proprietary analytics," Tristan mocked, putting air quotes around the words. "Sounds very important. Dad, did you hear that? Ava has analytics." My Uncle Robert slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. "That's enough, Tristan," he boomed. A tiny, stupid spark of hope flickered in me. Was he defending me. And you, he said, rounding on me, his finger jabbing in my direction. Lauren brings up one nice thing, and you have to turn it into a tacky, arrogant brag fest at the Thanksgiving table. We are trying to have a civilized family dinner, and you come in here waving your imaginary numbers around? It's classless, Ava, utterly classless. The room was dead silent. I could feel every eye on me. I was the problem. I was the one who had, by simply existing, successfully ruined Thanksgiving. The familiar shame was so thick I could barely breathe. I looked down at my plate, my hands trembling. Then I felt a hand on my arm. It was my mother. I turned to her, desperate for at least one ally, one person to say this was insane. She leaned in close, her eyes filled not with support, but with a desperate, pleading panic. Her words were a razor-sharp whisper meant only for me. "Ava, stop," she hissed, her fingers digging into my arm. "Just apologize to your uncle. You know how Tristan gets. You were never supposed to outshine him." The spark of hope didn't just flicker. It was instantly extinguished, replaced by a glacial cold. You were never supposed to outshine him. It wasn't just an observation. It was a rule, a command, a life sentence I had just been handed by my own mother. All my work, all my sleepless nights, all the sacrifices I'd made, none of it mattered. My purpose, in her eyes, was to remain small. Something inside me didn't just break. It snapped into a new, hard, and unfamiliar shape. The ghost was done being translucent. I looked at my mother's panicked face. I looked at Tristan, who was smirking into his wine glass, victorious. I looked at Robert, who was glaring at me like I was something he'd stepped in. "You're right, Mom," I said, my voice quiet but terrifyingly steady. I pulled my arm from her grasp. I slowly stood up from the table. The scraping of my chair leg on the hardwood floor was the only sound. Tristan's smirk faltered. Robert's glare turned to confusion. I pulled my phone from my pocket. "What?" Tristan snapped, his bravado wavering. "Going to show us your little bank account? Going to cry?" I held his gaze. "You're right, Tristan. That $25 million isn't the real money we should be talking about." I unlocked my phone and opened my email, tapping on a message from my company's legal counsel that had come in at 5:00 p.m. the night before. Then let's really ruin his night. The silence that followed my words was heavier and more complete than anything I had ever experienced in that house. It was a vacuum, sucking all the air and festive warmth out of the room. Tristan's smugness evaporated, replaced by a wary, pinched look. My Uncle Robert's face was a thundercloud, his brows drawn so low they nearly touched. My mother, Sharon, just looked terrified, her eyes wide, pleading with me to sit down and put the phone away. "Ava, don't be dramatic," Robert finally grumbled, waving a dismissive hand. "Sit down, you're making a scene." "I've been making a scene my entire life, apparently," I replied, my voice calm. "Every time I won a spelling bee, every time I got a scholarship, every time I didn't need your help." I thought back to my high school graduation. I had been named valedictorian. I'd worked tirelessly for it, sacrificing my social life to graduate with a 4 that secured me a full-ride scholarship to the state university. I'd been so proud. At the family dinner afterward, I'd mentioned my speech. Robert had grunted and said, "That's nice, but those academic types rarely succeed in the real world." Then he'd spent an hour praising Tristan for showing initiative by getting a C in a business elective. My mother had pulled me aside that night, too. "Don't mention the scholarship, honey," she'd whispered, just like she had tonight. "Robert just put the down payment on Tristan's car, and he's feeling the pinch. Don't make him feel bad. Don't make him feel bad. Don't make Tristan look bad. Don't outshine him." It was the unspoken contract I had been forced to sign in blood, and I hadn't even known it. "What is your point, Ava?" Robert demanded, his voice rising. He was a man who was used to being in control, and he could feel it slipping. "My point," I said, turning my phone screen so he couldn't see it, "is that Tristan is right. We should talk about real money, tangible assets, like property." Tristan let out another nervous scoff. Oh, here we go. Did you buy a little condo with your paper money? Good for you. I've had mine for a decade. No, I said, looking directly at him. I didn't buy a condo. My company has been expanding. We needed more office space, and we found a great commercial property downtown. A good investment. A tangible asset. My Uncle Robert's eyes narrowed. He was a financial advisor. He knew tangible assets. He still hadn't connected the dots. He was too arrogant to even consider it a possibility. We closed yesterday, I continued. Good for you, Robert snapped. What does this have to do with Thanksgiving dinner? Are you going to list your assets for us? Is this an investor pitch? No, I said. This is a tenant notification. I kept my gaze locked on Robert. His ruddy complexion went pale, as if all the blood had drained from his face in an instant. He knew. In that split second, he finally understood. You didn't, he stammered. Stonegate Financial is a tenant, Uncle Rowe. Bert, I said, my voice as cold and hard as the new shape of my resolve. And as of 5:00 p.m. yesterday, my company, Analytex, is your new landlord. We own the building. The gasp from my mother was a tiny, wounded sound. Lauren, the journalist, just stared, her mouth open, a look of stunned admiration on her face. Tristan just looked confused. What building? Dad, what is she talking about? Robert ignored him, his eyes fixed on me. The bully was gone, replaced by a cornered animal. That's a lie, he whispered, but it had no conviction. It's not, I said. I have the finalized acquisition documents right here. I have the email from the selling agent. I have the welcome letter my lawyers are sending out to all tenants on Monday morning. I was going to let you find out through them. I believe in keeping business and family separate. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. But you and Mom and Tristan, you've never let me do that. You've always made my success a family problem. So fine, let's treat it like one. Tristan finally caught up. His face, usually so smug, crumpled in on itself. You bought Dad's building, our building. It was never your building, Tristan, I said. You were just a tenant, and not a very good one it turns to be. I tapped my phone screen again, opening a different email from my new property management team. It was a summary of all current tenants, their lease terms, and their payment statuses. And that, I said, my voice dropping, brings me to the real money problem. My mother started to cry, quiet, wheezing sobs. Ava, please, she begged, this is your family. I know, I said, and the sadness in my own voice surprised me. And you were never supposed to outshine him. I looked back at Robert, whose entire empire, his whole identity as the family patriarch, the financial titan, the man who held the purse strings, was crumbling in front of the Thanksgiving turkey. The previous owners were, lax, I said, but my CFO is not. Uncle Robert, Stonegate Financial, is 3 months behind on its lease payments. That's, let me check, a little over $84,000 in arrears. Tristan shot up from his chair, his face purple. You're lying, my father pays his bills, we're successful. Are you? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Then you should have no problem paying the outstanding balance. My lawyers will be in touch on Monday with a formal pay or quit notice. As the new owner, I'm required to give you 30 days. But honestly, Uncle Robert, I'd advise you to just pay. The revelation that Robert's firm was on the verge of collapse hung in the air, thick and toxic. It was one thing to be exposed as a bully. It was another to be exposed as a fraud. Robert had built his entire identity on being the family's financial rock, the one who generously hosted every holiday, the one who could solve any problem with a checkbook. That image had just been shattered. He didn't yell, he didn't boom. He just sank back into his high-backed dining chair, looking suddenly, profoundly old. He stared at the half-eaten turkey, his hands trembling on the table. He was defeated. Tristan, however, was not. His panic immediately curdled into a familiar, sputtering rage. You did this on purpose, he shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me. You vulture, You bought that building just to humiliate us. I bought the building because it was a sound investment, Tristan, I said, my voice still level. It's in a prime location, and my company needs the top 2 floors. Honestly, I didn't even know your father's firm was a tenant until we were in due diligence. And I didn't know you were delinquent on rent until I got the tenant reports last night. I looked at him, at his expensive sweater and his pampered, angry face. But let's be honest. Even if I had, would it have been wrong? You've spent my entire life treating me like dirt. You've mocked every single thing I've ever earned. You just sat here, in a home my family was invited to, and called my life's work imaginary money, while you've been living on handouts and debt. Handouts, he sputtered. I'm a senior partner. You're your father's dependent? I shot back, my patience finally snapping. You're a 31-year-old man whose father pays his salary, his rent, and his golf club membership, all with money he apparently doesn't even have. You're not a partner, you're an allowance. Tristan looked like I had slapped him. He turned to his father, his eyes wide with desperation. Dad, tell her she's lying, tell her about the new account we landed. Robert didn't look up, he just shook his head, his face pale. She's not lying about the arrears, Tristan. The admission was quiet, but it was a bomb. Tristan's entire reality, the one his father had so carefully constructed for him, was dissolving. My mother, Sharon, finally found her voice. It wasn't angry. Just broken and confused. Robert, what does he mean? I thought the firm was doing better than ever. You just bought the lake house. Robert flinched. We're in a down market, Sharon. It's a temporary cash flow problem. $84,000 isn't a cash flow problem, Uncle Robert, I interjected, my heart hardening. It's a sign of a deep, systemic issue. You've been over-leveraged for years, haven't you? Living off a line of credit, projecting an image of wealth you couldn't sustain. And you've been dragging Tristan down with you, teaching him that image is more important than integrity. I thought of all the sacrifices my mother had made for him. The family, vacations she'd put on her own credit card to keep up with Robert. The way she'd pressured me to go to the state school, not because she couldn't afford a dorm, but because Robert had scoffed at the waste of private tuition, all while paying for Tristan's. My mother had spent her life worshipping a false idol, and she had sacrificed her own daughter on his altar. All this time, my mother whispered, the realization dawning on her face. All the holidays, all the advice you gave me about money, about Ava, it was all a lie. Now, Sharon, let's not be hasty. Robert began, trying to summon his old authority, but his voice was thin. No, my mother said, and I saw a new kind of strength flicker in her eyes. It wasn't the strength of a leader, but the strength of someone with nothing left to lose. She's right. You made me feel small. You made me push her down, my own daughter, just to protect his ego, she said, gesturing at the now silent Tristan. You told me Ava needed to be practical so she wouldn't embarrass Tristan's journey. What journey, Robert? A journey to foreclosure. Mother, stop, I said, putting a hand on her arm. This time, it was me supporting her. This is a private family matter, Robert hissed, finally looking up. His eyes were no longer angry, just desperate. Ava, you have no right to air this out. I have every right, I said. You made it my business when you let your son insult me. You made it my business when you yelled at me for a success I earned. And I'm definitely making it my business when you owe my company $84,000. I turned from the wreckage of the two men and looked at Lauren, who had been watching the entire exchange with a journalist's rapt attention, looking horrified and fascinated. Lauren, I said, I'm so sorry this dinner was a disaster, but thank you for being the only one to ever congratulate me. I then looked at my mother. She was crying, but her back was straight. She wasn't looking at her brother anymore. She was looking at me. Mom, I said, my voice softer. Let's go, I'll call you a car. No, she said, wiping her eyes. She stood up, grabbing her purse from the floor. I'm coming with you. My mother, Sharon, and I walked out of that house without another word. We left the door open, letting the cold November air rush into the overheated, silent dining room. We left Robert staring at his plate, a broken man. We left Tristan, his face a mask of disbelief, still trying to process how his entire world had been revealed as a house of cards. And we left Lauren, who was already discreetly typing something into her phone. The car ride to my mother's small, tidy suburban house was silent. She just stared out the window, her hands twisting a napkin in her lap. The weight of her brother's decades-long deception and her own complicity in the toxic dynamic was settling on her. When we pulled into her driveway, she didn't move. "He's been lying to me my whole life," she said, her voice small. "About everything. He told me my husband's pension plan was risky and that I should move it into his firm's stable fund. This was right after Dad died." A cold dread, sharper than anything I'd felt at the dinner table, seized me. "Mom, what did you do?" "I did it," she whispered, her eyes filling with a new, sharper terror. "I moved everything. My retirement, the money your father left for you, it's all with Robert." This was no longer about a family squabble or an overdue lease. This was about my mother's entire future. My inheritance. All of it in the hands of a man who was $84,000 behind on his rent. I put the car in park and turned to her. The anger was gone, replaced by a chillingly clear focus. I was no longer a hurt daughter. I was a CEO with a crisis to manage. "Okay," I said, my voice firm. "We're not going inside, we're going to my office. Right now." "What, Ava, it's Thanksgiving." "I don't care," I said. "We're going to call my corporate counsel. The pay or quit notice for Robert is no longer the priority. This is. We need to find out if your money is safe, and if it's not, we need to get it back." "But how?" she cried. He'll lie, he'll never give it back." "He won't have a choice," I said. A plan was already forming in my mind. The clever trap I had in place wasn't just the building ownership. It was the entire legal and financial arsenal that came with it. "Mom, as Robert's landlord, I have a right to assess the financial viability of my tenants, especially one who is severely delinquent. He's in breach of his lease. That breach gives me leverage. And as a potential victim of financial mismanagement, you have the right to demand a full accounting of your portfolio. We are going to combine those two things." We drove to my empty office building, the one I owned, but not the one Robert was in. My downtown headquarters was a sleek, glass-and-steel testament to imaginary money. I sat my mother down in a conference room with a bottle of water and got my chief counsel, David, on a video call. He was, understandably, confused to be getting a call at 9:00 p.m. on Thanksgiving, but when I explained the situation, his expression turned to steel. "He's been commingling funds, I'd bet my license on it," David said after listening to my mother's trembling story. "Using new investor money, like yours, Sharon, to pay off old debts or, more likely, fund his and his son's lifestyle. He's running a sinking ship and stealing from his own sister to plug the leaks." "So what's the plan?" I asked. "The plan is a two-pronged attack," David said. "First, I'm drafting a formal demand letter from you, Sharon, requesting an immediate, itemized statement of your accounts and a liquidation of all assets to be transferred to a neutral brokerage by close of business Monday. Second, I'm drafting the pay or quit notice from Analytics. We're going to hit him with both at the same time." "He'll just ignore the demand letter," my mother insisted. "He can't," I said, "because we're going to offer him a deal. A terrible, terrible deal." David nodded, catching on. "Exactly. We deliver both letters simultaneously on Monday morning. He'll panic. When he calls to beg for an extension on the rent, you, Ava, will tell him you're concerned about his firm's viability. You'll say you can't, in good conscience, extend his lease unless you see a clear accounting of his firm's assets and liabilities to prove he can pay." "He'll never show me that," I said. "He won't," David agreed. "But then you'll pivot. You'll say, 'Look, I don't want to evict my own uncle, just prove your good faith. My mother is also a client and she's panicking. She's requesting a liquidation. Process her transfer immediately, get her money out, and I'll grant you a 30-day extension on the rent to get your affairs in order. It was a brilliant trap. We were using the $84,000 in arrears as leverage to claw back my mother's entire life savings. He would be forced to choose. If he refused to release my mother's funds, I would immediately file for eviction and, worse, file a formal complaint with the SEC, triggering an investigation that would expose everything. He'd lose his firm, his license, and likely his freedom. But if he agreed, if he liquidated my mother's portfolio and transferred the money, he would be admitting, by that very action, that he had been using her money improperly. He'd be saving himself from eviction only to hand us the very proof we needed that he was a fraud. "He'll do it," my mother whispered, her eyes wide. "He'll do it to save the firm. He'll save his pride. He'll give me my money back just to get you off his back about the rent." "Exactly," I said. "He thinks I'm an arrogant kid who's in over her head. He'll see it as him outsmarting me. He'll think he's trading one hysterical woman's small account to solve his massive, immediate rent problem." "But what about Tristan?" my mother asked, her voice barely audible. "Tristan," I said, "made his choice. It's time for him to face the consequences of real money." I looked at David on the screen. "Let's get those letters drafted. We're sending them at 9:00 a.m. Monday morning." The weekend was the longest of our lives. My mother stayed with me, sleeping in my guest room, starting at every noise. She was a wreck, alternating between fits of tears and bouts of furious, whispered rants about Robert. I, on the other hand, was unnervingly calm. I had a plan. I had a legal team. I had leverage. The ghost was gone, and the CEO was in charge. Monday morning, at 9:01 a.m., David hand-delivered the 2 letters to the reception desk at Stonegate Financial. One, a stark, legal pay or quit notice on my company's letterhead. The other, a formal, notarized demand for liquidation from Sharon. We didn't have to wait long. At 9:17 a.m., my personal cell phone, the number Robert only had for family emergencies, lit up. It was my uncle. I let it ring 3 times. Then I answered, putting it on speakerphone. My mother sat across from me in my home office, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. "Ava," Robert's voice boomed, "boo." It was a forced, false bravado. I could hear the panic underneath it, like a high-pitched whine. "I got your message. This is an absurd, unprofessional way to handle business." "Is it?" I replied, my voice cool and flat. "I thought it was standard. You're a tenant. You're 3 months behind on your rent. You have 30 days to pay the $84,000 or my company begins eviction proceedings. It's very simple, uncle." "Now listen here," he sputtered. "There's just been a mix-up with our accounting. A simple, clerical error. The money is there, we're good for it. You can't just throw your own family out on the street." "I'm not," I said. "I'm a landlord protecting her investment. Honestly, I'm more concerned about the other letter you received." A sharp intake of breath on his end. That is a separate matter. Your mother is panicking. You've put these ideas in her head. She's been a client for 20 years. I have managed her money perfectly." "Then you should have no problem honoring her request," I said evenly. "Liquidate her accounts. Transfer the funds to the new brokerage listed in the letter. It's her money, Robert. She's allowed to have it." It's not that simple," he shouted, and the facade cracked wide open. "You don't just liquidate a 20-year portfolio. There are penalties, tax implications. It's invested in long-term funds. I need 60, 90 days to do it properly." He doesn't have it. The realization hit my mother and me at the same time. Her hands flew to her mouth. The money was gone. He had spent it. "You don't have 90 days, Robert," I said, my voice turning to ice. "You have 30 days to pay my company. And if you're telling me you can't even access your sister's money, how can you possibly access the $84,000 you owe me?" I heard him pacing, his breathing heavy and ragged. "What do you want, Ava?" he finally bit out. "What's your price? You want to ruin me? Fine, You'll get your building, but you'll never see a dime of that rent, and your mother's money will be gone forever, tied up in bankruptcy court. Is that what you want?" It was the threat of a desperate man. He was confirming our worst fears. "No," I said. "Here's what I want. I want to believe you. I want to believe this is all just a clerical error." "It is," he insisted. "Then prove it. I know you're in a tough spot. I don't want to evict my uncle. It's a bad look, so let's make a deal." I repeated the plan David and I had rehearsed. "You're telling me you can't get all of my mother's money at once. Fine, but you must have some of it. Prove your good faith. Liquidate? Let's say $100,000 of her money. Just $100,000. Transfer it to her new account by tomorrow at 5:00 p.m. I can't." "Transfer $100,000 of her own money to her, Robert," I said, my voice hardening. "Prove to me that you are solvent. Prove to her that her money is safe. You do that, and I will personally grant Stonegate Financial a 45-day extension on the rent. It gives you time to get your cash flow in order. It gets my mother off your back. It gets me off your back. Everybody wins." Silence. He was calculating. He was trapped. If he said no, he was admitting to me and my mother, who he knew was listening, that he didn't even have $100,000 of her money. He'd be admitting to grand larceny over the phone. He'd be evicted, and we'd go to the authorities immediately. But if he said yes, he'd have to scramble to pull money from God knows where, maybe from Tristan's trust, maybe from another client, to make that payment. He would be digging his own grave deeper, but it would buy him 45 days. And a man like Robert always believes he can fix everything in 45 days. "Fine," he growled. The word was ripped from his throat. "100,000 by tomorrow at 5:00. And then you call off your dogs, you give me the extension." "You have my word," I said. "You transfer my mother's funds, I sign the extension. Business is business." I hung up the phone. My mother burst into tears, not of sadness, but of a dizzying, terrifying relief. "He's going to do it," she wept. "He's going to find the money." "Yes, he is," I said, already typing an email to David. "He's going to move heaven and earth to make that payment. And in doing so, he's going to hand-deliver us the first piece of evidence we need to prove he's been defrauding you for years." The first crack in the facade had become a chasm, and we were just getting started. The wire transfer for $100,000 appeared in my mother's new, empty brokerage account at 4:52 p.m. on Tuesday. She stared at the number on her laptop screen and let out a sound I'd never heard from her, a choked, disbelieving laugh. It was the single largest sum of money she had ever seen in her life that wasn't tied to a mortgage. "He did it," she whispered. "He actually did it." "Of course he did," I said, closing my own laptop. I had just signed and emailed Robert the 45-day lease extension. He just ut himself 45 days. He thinks he's a genius. He thinks he just put out the fire. "But where did he get it?" she asked. "I don't know," I said, "and I don't care. What matters is that he did get it, and now we know he's vulnerable." But I wasn't going to wait 45 days. Robert thought he had bought time. What he had actually bought me was an opportunity. While he was scrambling to cover his tracks and my mother was breathing her first real sigh of relief, I was reinvesting. I hired a forensic accounting team. I didn't tell my mother, she was too fragile. She was focused on the $100,000, seeing it as a victory. I saw it as bait. I provided the accountants with my mother's original portfolio statements from 20 years ago and the meager, confusing reports Robert had sent her over the years. I also, through my company, gave them a remit to do a deep-dive background check on Robert Stone and Tristan Stone, citing landlord-tenant due diligence. The report came back 5 days later, and it was worse than I could have imagined. Robert's firm was a phantom. He'd lost his major clients years ago due to underperformance. He wasn't just living on my mother's money was the firm. He had been paying his lease, his golf membership, and Tristan's salary directly from her retirement account. He'd created dummy statements, showing modest gains while he was bleeding her dry. The $100,000 he'd transferred back to her, the accountants traced it. He'd taken out a high-interest bridge loan against the condo he'd bought for Tristan. He hadn't just stolen from his sister, he had bankrupted his son to pay her back. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was Tristan. Tristan wasn't just a senior partner. He was, on paper, the co-signer on half of Robert's bad loans. And more than that, he'd been using his position to run his own petty scams. The investigation uncovered a string of complaints filed with the Better Business Bureau from elderly clients Robert had passed off to him, accusing Tristan of high-pressure sales into exclusive real estate funds that didn't seem to exist. He wasn't just incompetent, he was actively malicious. He was a miniature version of his father, but without the thin veneer of charm. I had it all: the loan agreements, the fabricated statements, the client complaints. I had the full, detailed, devastating picture of their financial ruin, all tied up in a neat, 100-page report. My 45-day extension was still active. Robert and Tristan were probably at their golf club, celebrating their win, believing the storm had passed. They had no idea the hurricane was just offshore. I scheduled a meeting. I called Robert and told him that, as a courtesy, I wanted to have a final landlord-tenant meeting before Christmas to discuss the payment plan for his remaining arrears. I told him to bring Tristan, as I wanted to involve all senior partners in the firm's future. Robert agreed, his voice dripping with a fake, oily confidence. He was back in control. He thought he was coming to my office to negotiate. He and Tristan walked into my company's largest boardroom, the one with the 20-foot glass wall overlooking the city, 10 minutes late, holding expensive coffees. "Ava," Robert said, smiling, taking the seat at the head of the table that I usually sat in. "Good of you to call this meeting. We're prepared to offer you a very generous plan to settle the misunderstanding." Tristan lounged in the chair next to him, smirking. "Yeah, Ava, we're feeling generous." I stood at the other end of the table. I didn't sit. My mother was not with me. My lawyer was not with me. It was just me. "That's wonderful," I said. "But we're not here to talk about your $84,000 in arrears. We've moved past that." Robert's smile wavered. "We have." "Yes, we're here to talk about this." I pressed a button on the table's console. The 80-inch screen on the wall lit up. It wasn't a spreadsheet. It wasn't an email. It was my mother's original portfolio statement from 20 years ago. Total, $650,000. "What is this?" Robert snapped. I clicked to the next slide. It was his firm's current bank statement, which my accountants had acquired. Current balance, $14,200. "And this," I said, "is your firm today." I clicked again. A flowchart. A bright red line moving from Sharon's retirement fund to Stonegate operating, to Tristan's condo, to Tristan's salary, to Oakview Golf Club membership. Tristan's face went white. Robert stood up so fast his chair screeched back. This is illegal," Robert shouted. "You have no right to this information." "You're right, it is illegal," I said, my voice deathly quiet. "What you've done is highly illegal. It's called securities fraud. It's called embezzlement. It's called grand larceny. This isn't a cash flow problem, Robert. This is a criminal enterprise." Tristan was hyperventilating, his eyes bugging out. Dad, what is TH? Tell her it's not true." "Shut up, Tristan," Robert hissed. He looked at me, his eyes black with hatred. You set this up, the building, the Thanksgiving dinner. You did this to me." "You did this to yourself," I said. "You've been stealing from my mother for 20 years to fund his pathetic life. And you, Tristan," I said, rounding on him, "you've been helping him. This real estate fund you've been selling, my team found 3 of your clients. They are very, very interested to know where their money went." Tristan made a small, choking sound and shrank in his chair. "So here's the generous offer," I said, walking to the head of the table, forcing Robert to step back. I took my seat. "I have this report. I have a team of lawyers. I have the SEC on speed dial. By 5:00 p.m. today, you have two choices. I put two documents on the table. Option A, you sign this. It's a full confession. It details the fraud, the theft, everything. You will sign over your firm, what's left of it, to a receivership chosen by my mother. You will sign the deed to Tristan's condo, the one you took a loan on, over to my mother, as partial repayment. You will both surrender your financial licenses, and you will never, ever contact my mother or me again. We will take this confession, and we will not go to the authorities. You will be ruined, but you will be free. Robert was breathing like a wounded bull. Or, I said, you can choose option B, you can walk out of this room. And I will pick up this phone, and I will call the SEC, the state's attorney general, and my cousin Lauren at Tech Forward, though I think she'll pass this story on to the real news desk. You will both be in handcuffs by dinner. Your pictures will be on the 6:00 p.m. news. I leaned back in my chair. So, Robert, Tristan, after all these years of talking about real money, what's your choice? You have 1 hour. The boardroom was so quiet, the only sound was Tristan's ragged, shallow breathing. Robert stood frozen, his face a mottled, terrifying shade of red. He was a man watching his entire life, his legacy, his name, his freedom, circle the drain. The bravado he had worn for 30 years was gone, stripped away to reveal the terrified, cornered con man beneath. You can't, he finally whispered, his voice hoarse. Sharon wouldn't. She wouldn't send her own brother to prison. My mother isn't in this room, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. She's not the one you have to convince. I am, and I'm fresh out of family sentiment. You stole her future. You bankrupted her to pay for his golf games. I flicked my eyes to Tristan, who was now visibly trembling, tears of pure, selfish terror welling in his eyes. He's your son, I said to Robert. You're supposed to be his father, but you didn't raise a man. You raised a parasite just like you, and now you're going to drag him down with you. That was what broke him. Not the threat to his own freedom, but the sight of his golden child finally, truly paying the price. Tristan was his life's work, his one success, and I had just shown him that his creation was a hollow, weeping fraud. He didn't know, Robert choked out, a pathetic last-ditch lie. Tristan didn't know the extent. It was me. It was all me. I managed the books. Don't you dare, Tristan suddenly sobbed, turning on his father with a venom I'd never seen. Don't you dare put this on me. You told me to sell those funds. You told me it was just how business was done. You used me. I gave you everything, Robert roared, his composure shattering. You gave me nothing, Tristan screamed, his face contorted. You gave me a fake job, a fake life. It's all fake. And now she, he pointed a shaking finger at me, she has everything. It was the ugliest, most pathetic, and most honest exchange I had ever witnessed between them. The golden child and his creator, finally admitting that the throne was made of cardboard and the crown was plastic. 50 minutes, I said, looking at my watch. Robert's shoulders slumped. The fight was over. He walked on shaking legs to the table and stared at the two documents, the confession. He looked at Tristan, whose face was buried in his hands. He picked up the pen. Wait, I said. He froze, the pen hovering over the paper. We're not doing this here, I said. This isn't a private matter. You humiliated me at a family dinner. You built your empire on a lie that my entire family bought. They deserve to see the truth. What are you talking about? He whispered. My mother is hosting a pre-Christmas family dinner tonight, I said, at a private room in the Old City Club. She invited you both this morning. She told you it was to clear the air. You, Robert, told her you would graciously attend. He hadn't, my mother had. It was the last part of my plan. You're not signing this here, I said. You're going to come to that dinner, you're going to sit at that table, and you are going to sign it in front of my mother. You are going to sign it in front of Lauren, who I've also invited. You're going to sign over Tristan's condo, and you are going to look my mother in the eye as you confess to stealing her entire life. No, Robert said, shaking his head. No, that's too much. It's cruel. Was it cruel, Uncle? I asked, standing up, when you called me classless for a success I earned? Was it cruel when you let your son mock me? Was it cruel when you stole my mother's retirement, year after year, so you could buy another bottle of $100 wine for a Thanksgiving dinner you couldn't afford? I pointed to the door. You have a choice. Sign it here and I'll call the police right now, or sign it tonight and you walk away. You have until 7:00 p.m. to decide. I walked out of the boardroom, leaving them alone with the confession and the undeniable, catastrophic truth. At 7:00 p.m., I stood next to my mother in the private dining room. Lauren was already there, a small notebook on her lap. My mother was pale but resolute. The door opened. Robert and Tristan walked in. They looked like ghosts. Their expensive suits hung on them and their eyes were hollow. They didn't speak. They walked to the table, and Robert pulled the folded confession from his jacket pocket. He laid it on the table. He looked at his sister, his face crumpling. "Sharon," he began. "Don't," my mother said, her voice stronger than I had ever heard it. "Don't you say my name, not after what you did, just sign it." Tristan was weeping openly now, a horrible gulping sound. Robert took out his pen. He signed the confession. He signed the deed transfer for the condo. Tristan, his hand shaking so badly he could barely hold the pen, signed his part, surrendering his license and attesting to his father's statement. My mother took the papers, her hands perfectly steady. She folded them and gave them to me. "Now get out," she said. Robert looked at her, his eyes begging for something, forgiveness, absolution, a memory of the family that had never really existed. "Get out," my mother repeated, "and never ever speak to us again." They turned and walked out of the room. The door clicked shut. My mother sat down heavily. Lauren just looked at me, her face a mixture of shock and awe. I looked at the signed confession in my hand. The imaginary money had just become the most real thing in all our lives. It had bought my mother's future back. It had bought our freedom. The aftermath was not loud. There were no more confrontations, no more yelling. There was only a profound, echoing quiet. Robert and Tristan Stone disappeared. The very next day, the Stonegate Financial sign was taken down from the building. I didn't evict them, they were already gone. They dissolved the firm, filed for bankruptcy, and, as Lauren quietly discovered, moved to a small, rented apartment 2 states away. Tristan's condo was sold in a week, the proceeds, along with the $100,000 Robert had already transferred, going directly into my mother's new, secure, and very real retirement account. It wasn't all of her money. It wasn't the 20 years of compound interest Robert had stolen, but it was enough. It was a future. My mother, Sharon, changed. The timid, conflict-averse woman who had lived in her brother's shadow was gone. In her place was someone quieter, but infinitely stronger. She resigned from her job at the university, explaining that she needed to reevaluate her life. She started volunteering at a legal aid clinic, helping people who were facing foreclosure and eviction, people just like the ones Robert and Tristan had created. Our relationship was not magically healed. There was still the scar of her words, "You were never supposed to outshine him." We talked about it once. We were having coffee on my balcony, overlooking the city. "I was so afraid," she told me, not looking at me. "Afraid of him, afraid of his anger, afraid he would cut us off. I thought his success was our safety net. I never stopped to think that your success, your strength, was the real one. I'm so sorry, Ava. I spent your whole life trying to dim your light because I was afraid of his shadow." "I know, Mom," I said, and I did. I couldn't forget, but I could forgive. Lauren never wrote the story. I asked her not to. The confession was locked in my lawyer's safe, a guarantee of our family's newfound peace. But she did write a brilliant investigative piece on shadow firms and family-run financial fraud using anonymous sources. It won an award. As for me, my company continued to grow. We moved into the top 2 floors of Robert's old building, the one I now owned. The imaginary $25 million became $100 million, and then more. But it was never about the money. It was about the reality. My paper money had bought a building. It had uncovered a crime. It had rescued my her, and it had finally, definitively, proven to my family that my success was not imaginary. It was the most real money any of them had ever seen. I often think of that Thanksgiving, of Tristan's sneer, Robert's rage, and my mother's whisper. They were all trapped in a story someone else had written for them. That night, I just decided to write my own ending. The ghost had become the author, and I was finally at peace.